to go? Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this calling for the decision to award the concession contract for delivery of tennis centre operations in Norwich. The decision was taken at Cabinet on the 9th of February, and the reason for calling is to examine the contract management, qualities of customer service and specific deliverables to check that the city is delivering its aims in this provision, in the provision of people living well in great neighbourhoods, housing and environment corporate priorities. Before we get fully into that, I've got apologies from Councillor Vaughan Thomas, Councillor Everett, Councillor Huntley, Councillor Manning, I assume, is that correct?
Yes, thank you. That's right, Chair. And we've got three substitutes, Councillors Peake, Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Button.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest for members for the items this evening? No, thank you. In which case we'll now go on to item 3, which is on page 5 of the agenda. I've already set out the sort of reasons for the call-in. Councillor Galvin, I don't know whether you wanted to just say anything to the call-in in your name as well as mine, and Councillor, I just wanted to say anything before we move on to giving the answers to the questions posed in the call-in.
Thank you, yes. I haven't prepared anything, but I would like to say that to thank everyone for being here and giving your time up. I know it's an extra meeting. I think it's really important. I know we all think it's really important that public money is spent well and that good results come from it. And this is a rather long contract affecting a lot of parks. And the previous contract, we had a lot of difficulty to understand, a lot of difficulty to get information from, and we were told, well, why did you not call it in for scrutiny before, etc. So this really is being called in to make sure that it's a fit-for-purpose contract for Norwich, for its parks, for its people, that money's well spent and that we get really good results from it. So that's the motivation behind the call-in, because there wasn't quite enough information in the report for us to be able to be totally comfortable with that. So we're hopeful that scrutiny today will be able to just hear a bit more and satisfy ourselves that this will really be a good fit-for-purpose contract going forward for the city.
Thank you very much for that, and can I thank Councillor Waters, Leader of the Council, for being here. We've got Andy Summers, Simon Meek and Louise Watson on here, as well as officers to answer some of the questions. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do is, we've got 3 sections where there's a series of questions that have been asked as part of the call-in. I'd like to take those a section at a time, perhaps with an officer giving the answers to the questions that have been posed there, and then when we get to the end of that section, there'll be an opportunity for clarification questions and any discussion amongst members. So, section 1 is contract management. Can I hand over to an officer to take us through the answers there, please? Simon, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So question 1A was what constitutes the management of the operation of the courts? Customer management-wise, the service provider is responsible for the membership and it's responsible for the management of the court bookings and also the point of contact for the customer inquiries and complaints. In terms of preparing the courts for play, the operator will ensure that all hard courts are ready for play at all times. The operator will ensure that the surface will be free of stones, debris, feces, glass, leaves and litter. The operator will be responsible for maintaining the posts and the nets throughout the year. The operator will ensure that all posts and nets are inspected for defects and repaired or replaced immediately, so ready for use. The operator will report any signs of vandalism to Norwich City Council. The operator will be expected to conduct weekly site condition checks of all courts, from health and safety perspective, any damage in the overall condition, and record on a form and to evidence this, that it's occurring at contract monitoring meetings. If there are any concerns or damage noted during the weekly checks, reported by a member of the public or noticed by the operator must notify the council within 24 hours, and if the courts will be closed if it's presenting a health and safety hazard. The operator will supply Norwich City Council upon request with an electronic copy of all installation data in a format to be agreed with the Norwich City Council. In reality, as well as if there are coaches on court every day, then they will obviously, outside of those regular checks, would report any concerns. Maintenance operations, the operator will achieve the standard outlined above in terms of the core maintenance by a regular programme of maintenance. They'll do daily bin emptying, and they'll be responsible for professional jet washing and cleaning, which includes annual moss, and that'll be the operator's responsibility. Evidence is produced at the contract monitoring meetings of completion of cleaning and treatment works, and we'll expect receipts or invoices. All contracts engaged to provide this service will be required to be approved by the council before commencement of the works to ensure that they don't compromise the court warranties. Clearing of leaves, debris off the court will be the operator's responsibility, and for preference and to be kind to the surface, the use of a battery-operated blower is required. Any alternative options will need to be specified and agreed by the council. The operator will be liable for repairs to the surface or equipment due to misuse. If this is proven to be gross misuse, the contract may be cancelled. The council expects any repairs to be made at the operator's cost. Question 1B. In what increments will the annual income to the council of £32,000 for the site cost be provided, payable annually, monthly? So they will go up over time from the new sites that come on board, and they'll be invoicing will be done on a quarterly basis in arrears. 1C, what the penalties around non-provision of service or non-payment? There aren't any default clauses within the contract. If an issue arises with non-provision of service or non-payment, these will be picked up early via contract meetings with the aim of working together on an improvement plan to resolve them. If this does not resolve the issue, then as a last resort, the contract could be ended. But it's, it will progress on a partnership of working together to deliver the right outcomes. The options would then be, if it was ended, would be to re-procure, potentially delivering a basic service in-house in the interim, e.g. members can still join and still book and access courts. The current review of environmental service business plans will incorporate this as a specific area of risk. 2A. What controls does the council have over the rates charged by the company to the public? Single site memberships will be fixed at £35 per household for the first year of the contract, was stipulated in the tender pack. Following this, member charges will be negotiated by the operator and the council. The operator will submit proposed membership pricing as part of their business plan. 2B. What control does the council have over the membership system operated by the company? The membership system used is called Club Spark and is hosted by the LTA as a national piece of software, and it links in with the operation of the automated gates and the bookings at the sites, as well as gathering some information from the performance indicators. The software currently doesn't gather all the information the council requires for the new contract. I have discussed this with the LTA, and they will be feeding a request into their software developers as a result of this. They did say, however, that as with all software updates, there are certain conditions that need to be met to warrant the investment, but the LTA did acknowledge the need and will be feeding it back. In the interim, the contractor will be expected to put a system in place which we will develop with them during mobilisation to record that information we require, but isn't captured by the existing software. Data and software related to membership is required to be transferred to the next operator at the termination of the current contract. The system also facilitates the pay-and-play operations. If someone does not have a smartphone or computer bookings aren't possible, then they will do it manually over the telephone, the service provider that is. And as I said, the system doesn't record all the criteria that we currently require, but a system will be put in place from the 1st of April to begin gathering that. What risk assessment due diligence has been conducted, be required? An options appraisal assessing risk has been conducted to ensure the procurement route is appropriate. This has been signed off by the Executive Director of Development and City Services and the Business Relationship and Procurement Manager. Appropriate procurement practice has been followed for this contract in line with public contract regulations and the Council's procurement principles. This includes that the suppliers have been required to complete the standard procurement questionnaire, including company disclosures, including details of persons of significant control and relevant registrations, mandatory exclusions and discretionary exclusions, economic and financial standing, technical and professional ability, including examples of other contracts they have undertaken and contact details. Procurement has been planned and carried out to allow for appropriate mobilisation between the current contract and the new contract. Financial forecasting is required as part of the quality evaluation for this procurement. A further Dun & Bradstreet check is conducted on any supplier to ensure they are of financial standing to carry out the contract. 3B. Which break clauses are in the contract? It's a 5-year contract with a potential second 5 years. Standard clauses related to the failure of the contract to provide services or breach of licence or financial performance are the opportunities for breaks if that was required. But again, I would say it's the way the contract works is in partnership between ourselves, the LTA, and the organisation. So it would be a last resort to reach that point. Regarding provision of LTA registered venues to ensure safeguarding obligations are fulfilled, what assessment process is there for safeguarding checks, independent or self-led? The company has a contractual obligation to ensure that all individuals engaged in the provision of the regulated activity are subject to valid enhanced disclosure checks undertaken through the Criminal Records Bureau, including a check against the adults barred list or the children's barred list as appropriate, and to monitor the level of validity of these checks under this clause for each member of staff. LTA registered venues have specific obligations that need to be met, and compliance with both of the above will be monitored by a contract monitoring meeting involving the council, service provider and the regional officer from the LTA. What will happen if the venue fails to achieve minimum LTA standards and loses its registration? The contract officer will work with the service provider and the LTA to ensure an improvement plan is put in place and delivered. Question 5. Who checks that the company has ensured facilities and services provided are safe? The contract officer will monitor this through information provided as part of the contract monitoring process and also by a random schedule of visits to facilities to assess them and record their findings. Issues will be raised at the contract monitoring meeting. Question 6. Who audits the accounts of the company to check it is paying the living wage and how often? Audited year-end accounts in relation to the council's telecentre operations will be provided by the operator to the council by July of each year from 2023. The contract officer will require evidence of salaries paid in compliance with the living wage as part of the contract monitoring process. Contract management meetings will take place every 2 months unless there are any concerns arising during the mobilisation phase, in which case they will be monthly, until the council is continue on that basis until the council is satisfied the service is being delivered to achieve the target set. Norwich City Council expect the service provider to manage on an open book basis with the council, so we're able to review progress on a regular basis as agreed with the successful service provider. What is the term of the contract? 5 years plus possible 5-year extension. Number 8. How will the council audit the above provision during the contract term? Will a service level agreement be entered into? The provision has not been included in this year's audit plan. There won't be a service level agreement as there is a contract in place to ensure that the service is delivered. Question 9. Who maintains the facilities and to what standard? My note is if you refer back to contract management 1A, there's an explanation in there. The council is responsible for the annual maintenance of the gates, lighting, columns and scheduled resurfacing and repainting. 9B. Who deals with ad hoc issues such as vandalism? The service provider will report issues of criminal damage to police and also the contract officer. The operator will be liable for repairs to service or equipment due to misuse. And again, if it relates to the light columns, fencing or gates, then that will be the council's responsibility. Question 9C. If unforeseen issues or maintenance affect profitability, what process is followed? Norwich Parks Tennis, since it first started, has been set set up in a way to minimise this risk. There's a scheduled programme of annual light and access system maintenance along with scheduled resurfacing and colouring is in place to minimise the risk of unforeseeable costs within a year. New services under warranty will be maintained in accordance with the conditions of the warranty. The service provider will be carrying out weekly maintenance as specified previously in the maintenance section, which should help with the longevity of the course. And we've not had an issue arise in the previous 10 years of the contract operating. If it does arrive, it will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis regarding the specifics of the incident and also the financial situation at the time. Will the company provide an out-of-hours service if floodlights are misused, or is this the council's responsibility? The floodlights are the responsibility of the council and will be covered by the council's standard out-of-hours operating procedures for all its public assets. Question 11. How will the company liaise with local residents and Park Friends Group? Norwich Park Tennis already has an established relationship with Friends of Eaton Park and utilises notice boards managed by the Friends to advertise its initiatives. Friends of Waterloo Park are relatively new and I would expect a similar relationship to develop there. Awareness of Norwich Park Tennis is also raised with all residents through Citizen periodically. Will the provider be encouraged to follow links? If so, how? Exploring the benefits of Norwich Park Tennis and friends of groups is something we will explore. There are some key areas in the performance indicators we wish to prioritise for driving improvement in first though. What are the council's criteria for selecting a provider? And that's contained in Appendix A. So I won't read through it all at this point. And how much weight will be given to the need to increase use by people from reducing inequality areas? Again, you can see that in Appendix A. I would just say that in terms of the weighting, the section on inclusivity was weighted higher than the other sections. What lessons from earlier contracts for Norwich Park Tennis has the council drawn on in formulating the contract for the new provider? When Norwich Park Tennis started originally in 2012, it was based on a new model, which was developed with the LTA and was 50% funded by them, and was led by sports development colleagues and delivered at Eaton Park. The LTA conditions at that point related to us accepting their funding around player pathways, so the driver was very much numbers of people playing tennis and people getting coaching. There have been considerable changes from the original contract to this one based on lessons learned. The new contract has improved alignment with the council's priorities. Driving income generation through player coaching is self-motivated by the service provider. Our focus has therefore focused on activities outside of that, which deliver the council's required outcomes. And we've improved the performance indicators driven by the council's needs and not the LTA. What arrangement will be put in place if the provider is no longer able to satisfy the contract? I covered that in question 1C above. Question 15. What additional arrangements for monitoring and evaluating performance will be put in place based on experience at Norwich Park Tennis since 2012? When Norwich Park Tennis started, as I've said, it was a new model. So we've increased the framework of PIs to enable more specific monitoring to improve the data held to monitor contract performance, identify issues early and make changes. We've improved a requirement for data to target specific user segments. The way in which primary data supporting the performance indicators is provided to enable us to use it and be able to manipulate it for our needs is a requirement within the new contract. The need for data types and a form of reporting to be consistent throughout the contract, and the changes approved by the contract officer. Improved way in which we store the data. There was a challenge in terms of it moving from one service to another service and inheriting in their system, whereas now we'll put an improved system in place. Contract meeting to have an accountable officer. Previously this wasn't always clear as sports development colleagues were involved. An improved contract meeting structure in terms of reference to be agreed, ensuring that the service provider provides the data required in accordance with pre-meeting timescales, and improve contract management meetings that drill down on performance and where required drive change and improve performance. That's the end of the first bit.
Thank you very much, Simon, for those answers. Do any members have any questions or clarification of some of the answers that Simon's given? Councillor Galvin.
Thank you very much, Simon, for very full answers, and yeah, thank you for answering all those questions, because there were a lot of them. I just wanted to check question, when we said it's a £35 a year, did you say it's the first year only it's set at as 35 and then it's renegotiated?
Yes, so, you know, being out to tender and new providers potentially coming in, what we didn't want was any change in the first year, and then an opportunity to discuss any changes going forward to be agreed with us. I think, you know, a driver for us with the contract, if, you know, we've come a long way since 2012 when we had deteriorating courts, that were a pressure on the revenue budget, so it needs to financially stack up as a sustainably. Equally, there's the balance of inclusivity and making it affordable. So I think.
Thank you. So just on that point, how will the council guarantee its negotiations at that point that it will remain an affordable price? What are how will the council negotiate? I'd be very keen to see things capped beyond 1 year at £35. It'd be very problematic if, having let the contract, prices then had to rise steeply after 1 year. So how would we avoid that happening?
Well, I wouldn't anticipate prices increasing steeply, and part of the conversation in those discussions may be that there are facilities that serve an area of greater deprivation. So it isn't to say that the pricing will be the same across the city necessarily, but that will depend on the conversations with the provider to ensure that it financially stacks up. In terms of the open book exercise, it won't be looking that the price is going up to line the pockets of the contractor beyond a profit on their business and being financially sustainable.
I think it may also be helpful to add that as part of the submission through the commissioning exercise, any potential providers were asked to set out as part of their business case their proposal in terms of the pricing. So we can already use that as a fundamental basis when it comes to any negotiation to say your business plan said you'd be able to deliver this for this price, therefore what has changed that may drive any differentials in the pricing structure. So they're coming into it with an expectation, a solid expectation between the council and the providers as to what the pricing structures might look like.
Thank you for that. Any further questions at this stage? Councillor Carlo, I see questions for clarification in relation to that first section.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to ask about question 12, please, and weight given to the need to increase use by people from reducing inequality target areas. But I'm also interested in increasing use by people from within those areas, specifically from households on universal credit, for example, because areas are different from individuals or groups with particular needs. And so I wondered how that's going to take place, please. And secondly, I wanted to ask the tender date, the tender closure date was the 11th of February. And to ask how many actual inquiries or bids have been received, please. Thank you.
So can you just clarify the first question for me, please?
Yeah. in talking about inequality target areas, that's a bit rather different from talking about individuals or individual groups within those areas who, for example, who may be on universal credit and in suffering greater deprivation. So I wondered how the provider is actually going to encourage people from those groups to apply, to take part in tennis, please.
Presumably, just to clarify, but you may have an area which is hitherto perceived to be relatively affluent, but within that area there are pockets of people who are not, and how the approach can assist them with accessing it.
I think at the time we went out to tender, I suppose as a measurable, the RETA was the thing that we focused on, and alongside the protected characteristics is recognised by the council as something to focus on. So that initially was what went on in the tender. The nerve around other people that may be affected that is probably was not put out at the time of the tender document for them to consider as part of their bid. But it is a good point, and it's something that we'll pick up with going forward when we have a new operator in place.
It's not something that you've considered, given that you've been running, or the council's been operating a contract since 2012, operating Norwich Parks Tennis since then. I just wondered what lessons you've been able to draw in terms of usage by people on very, very low incomes.
I think as I said before, when the first contract started in 2012, it was very much driven behind getting tennis that was disappearing from the parks, improve facilities in the parks on a financially sustainable basis, which it has achieved. But we never had the data set around that, and that's part of the baseline that we'll be gathering before we go into the new contract. So we haven't got that data at this point in time.
I just wondered why that is, given that the Norwich City Council has spent a huge amount of money on Norwich Parks Tennis, and I would have thought that's one of the basic data sets that we would have collected. In fact, I understood that was so from the original contract from 2012, that was one of the KPIs to collect that data.
I'll bring the leader in at this point, please.
Well, I think we should also frame your questions, Councillor Carlin, in terms of the robust anti-poverty strategies that we have actively pursued for many years, making sure that people's financial bottom line is as secure as possible. So I think that should be something you should take into account. I mean, I know you abstained on the budget, but within that budget there were significant sums of money that intended to support people who are in financial difficulty and making the facilities of the city accessible to them.
Thank you. I think there was another part to Councillor Carlo's question around the number of number of interest from prospective suppliers.
Sorry, what was the second question? Sorry, Chair.
It's just how many people have expressed an interest in tendering so far by the 11th of February when it closed.
3 people expressed an interest in tendering.
Thank you for that. I had Councillor Galvin, then I had Councillor Fulton McAllister, and Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Just to go to actually the management again, thanks for explaining all the technical aspects around it. I just wanted to ask about something that's come up from residents as flooding and land drainage issues, and to ask particularly about any flood risk assessments that are being done due to the hard surfacing and also maintenance of the court. I understand that permeable courts, but those, I think the concerns are around the ongoing maintenance of the permeability. I'm not an expert in that area, but I've had questions really from residents about flood risk assessment.
I'm no expert on flood management either, but what I will say is that part of the planning application process that is looked and considered by the planners against safety what flood risk and things, and it didn't require, as far as I remember, it was some time ago, an assessment to be done on that, but it was a matter that was handled by the planning process.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fulton McAllister, please.
Thank you, sir. I just really wanted to ask a question which was focused on the actual report that went to Cabinet. What were the viable alternatives to issuing to Cabinet deciding to enter into a concessionary contract? Were there any viable alternatives?
No, there weren't. We'd reached this. There'd been some expressions of interest with when changes were being made at High Tennis. The initial one of those was I met with a representative of the group. We discussed the asset transfer process. I provided the group with the grounds maintenance specifications that were within the contracts for those courts, and the individual came back to say there was the group of willing participants, when they saw the work involved, that no longer progressed. They said they wouldn't be progressing it. There was an expression of interest later on in the process when we were going through the process of planning permission and things, and based on the content of their business proposal, which was more expensive for people to play than the Norwich Parks tennis proposal, and didn't achieve the objectives of Norwich Parks tennis proposal. Because of the delays in that time, the funding for the Lta dropped from 50 to 25%. There was a view taken that that decision was made by members that we would progress with the contract.
Yeah, there was a percentage. It was 50 to 25, wasn't it? In terms of the LTA.
The LTA funding, yeah, it went from 50 over the period of delivery, went from 50 to 25 to 0.
Thank you. Councillor Stukely, I think you were next, please.
Yes, thank you for your comprehensive answers. I didn't have any major concerns on this section, and I'm certainly reassured. And for context, the costing, I think, in the proposal that you referenced just now, I think was £60 per person rather than £35 per household, I understand.
Thank you for that. Any further questions for clarification on the first section that we've just had on those answers to? If not, we'll move on to the Equalities and Customer Service section.
I just want to clarify an answer that Councillor Waters gave in terms of the budget and ensuring provision of extra funding for people on very low incomes. From what I understand what you're saying, Councillor Waters, Council wants to make increase incomes available to people so that they can eat or heat their homes and play tennis. Is that the case?
Our ambition, Councillor Carlo, is to make sure that the citizens of the city enjoy the best quality of life possible and have access to leisure as well as the Maslow's hierarchy of eating and having shelter. And I have to say that we do that in the face of an extremely hostile government, which you might want to acknowledge.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to the next section then, so it's Equalities and Customer Service. We've got 10 questions that were submitted for that, so Simon, is that you again for those?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much then.
Okay, question 1. Explain and provide the baselines that the contract seeks to increase on, and by what factor the increase is expected. In these areas, levels In these areas, levels of people's activity, used by local school groups, used by specific age groups, which age groups, used by people for reducing inequality target areas, interest and opportunity for people to take up tennis, how will this be measured, used by people with a disability, use of facilities by members of underrepresented ethnic groups. The Council's expectation is that the understanding of the level of use by protected groups is improved to provide a baseline and that stretching targets are put in place to increase use. Currently don't have those figures as they'll need to be improved by Norwich, need to be informed by Norwich data and also conversations with the LTA and the data that they hold through their insight team. And also through improved membership data which we'll collect for the start of the new contract. Then, having had those discussions with the LTA, looking at the Norwich data, we'll look at what stretching targets are for the specific areas within the performance indicators. How will equipment be provided to those without the means to purchase rackets, balls and tennis shoes? The sessions that are usually provided as free ones by the service provider, and rackets and balls are made available. Tennis shoes are not required, a pair of training shoes or plimsolls are adequate to play. How people transit from free introductory tennis is something to explore with the next service provider in terms of funding to support it and the use of other parts concessions on those sites to have equipment for them to learn out. So currently at Eaton Park, the table tennis bats and balls are held by the cafe. So it's an arrangement that we could look at the other sites that do have on-site concessions such as Waterloo Park. Which groups have been consulted in the drawing up of these requirements of the contract? The tender process has been informed by the Council priorities, procurement procedures, learnings from the previous contract and the development officer from the LTA. Question 4. How will customer satisfaction be measured? Complaints and compliments will be monitored monthly. The use of the customer satisfaction survey will be discussed and provided to identify areas for service improvement. It is currently being considered as something that the Council may do as part of its contract management. Exact detail requires working with the service provider to try and maximise the outcomes from the contract to improve the service. Question 5. Who arbitrates if a complaint is received by the public regarding the service? Complaints will initially be handled by the service provider. If they are unable to resolve it satisfactorily in the eyes of the complainant will be able to escalate to the Council's complaint process. Will Norwich notes be accepted by the company in payment? This has been discussed previously with the existing provider who was open to accepting them, but Norwich notes are no longer active. How does the Council address the inbuilt bias of the contract towards not increasing the use from people from reducing inequality target areas and impacting on the provider income? Tender quality evaluation criteria scores have been weighted to increase the focus on community engagement and reducing inequality. The provision of player development pathways, coaching has not been scored as this is the main income generator for the operator, but not a priority in terms of objectives of Norwich Park's tennis. Performance criteria in the contract are focused on the objectives of Norwich Park's tennis, and performance against these criteria is considered when determining a potential extension after 5 years. Question 8. Will the Council ask the new provider to supply free tennis coaching and floodlighting to people on very low incomes? And if so, what will be the minimum number of free sessions per annum? There is a requirement to provide free tasting days with coaching support and also free open sessions for court use at all sites and on a quarterly basis. It is unlikely that these will include floodlit sessions. What is the Council's expectation of the increase in the use of courts by groups with protected characteristics based on its experience of monitoring of Norwich Park's tennis since 2012? As I've mentioned previously, the data in relation to this hasn't been held about the membership, but the Council's expectation is that the understanding of the level used by protected groups is improved to provide a baseline and stretching targets put in place to increase use. These will be informed using improved membership data, Norwich data and LTA data, and agreed with the service provider during the mobilisation period. How many tennis sessions annually does the council anticipate will be covered by Norwich notes based on its experience of Norwich Park tennis since 2012? I'll just refer you back to my answer. Question 6. Question 10, it should be 10B. Will regular free coaching use of floodlights be offered alongside? The use for a supported games tennis session would be the preferred route. There will be no floodlit sessions.
Thank you very much for those answers. Before I open it up to members, I just had a follow-up to question 1, and I appreciate around needing to begin gathering the baseline data, which will sort of happen when the new provider comes into play. Do you have an expectation from a timescale to when the data, as requested in that question 1, is likely to start being available?
I'd have an expectation that whether it's transferred to a new operator or the incumbent one, that there will be a message that goes out to all the new membership. And one of the things with, it's voluntary providing this data, but what I want to happen is that actually we at the time of selling the new service or the ongoing delivery of the existing one, that we said to the current members, going forward, where they're looking at inclusivity in these certain areas and a request that they provide that data back. So I would want it to be in the first at the handover. Really, we start that process completely within a month, and then ongoing with new memberships.
Thank you very much for that. Looking at members now, any members with a question? Councillor Osborne, then Pete, then Galvin. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you so much again for the answers both in this section and the previous one. For me, this is in a way the crux of the issue for me personally, because we've probably spent a lot of money on tennis over the last few years. And what I would like to see, and it may be that that evidence becomes available, but what I'd like to see is what benefit we get out of that and what benefit citizens of Norwich get out of that, particularly lower income residents. So that for me is the crux of the issue, and I'd like to see that before we proceed with spending more money on tennis courts. Not really a question, it's more of a statement.
Yeah, not really a question. Thank you. Councillor Peake, I think you had a question.
Thanks for your answers to the questions, but can I have clarification on question 2? You mentioned about free tennis. Would that be free hire equipment for the rackets and balls, etc. as well?
Yeah, there'll be free sessions. So if people did have their own equipment, but if they haven't, what we don't want is a lack of a racket or a ball or tennis shoes to be a barrier to play in. It's difficult at sites which don't have an on-site concession, but what we would be looking to do is work with the concessions, and as I said at Eaton Park we already do around the table tennis, to look at support from those concessions to make rackets and ball available, and people can play in regular trainings. It doesn't need tennis shoes.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask 2 things really. I don't know if we've got a figure on how much has been spent on tennis, on providing tennis in this time. I mean, I'd heard around 750,000, but I don't know if that's correct. But the more specific question as well is, when the original policy was set up to make tennis a focus and to provide this substantial programme, what were the aims within that policy and decision? Because the baselines would flow from those aims that were first set out. So there would have been some baseline or policy at that original stage. What was that?
Thinking back to 2012, we were in a position where courts were deteriorating, the hard courts. We had a situation with the grass courts at Eton at the time, so there were 4 grass courts at Eton, and the subsequent ones at Higham, where For the grass, we used to receive complaints about unpredictable banks, and I had somebody come out to look at it in probably pre-2012 to look at Lta and Wreck, which had 2 grass courts, and they were starting to settle over time. We're going to need relaying, so going forward there was a larger expense that the council was going to incur in terms of lifting and relaying all the grass courts. And these is a provision where income was reducing, they were available for a short period of the year, they were the weather had much more of an impact on when they were playable, and they were costly to maintain based on the level of income that we were getting in. And so High, as an example, was 40,000 annual costs, and it dropped over the years to around £2,500–3,000 worth of income. And also club use at High dropped from 5 clubs down to 1 club. So that was the driver, was to look at how can we continue to provide what is an accessible sport to people into the future that provides quality facilities, but not only can we invest the capital in that facility, but we have a way of generating the revenue to run it and maintain that quality of provision on an ongoing basis. So that was the initial driver in 2012. And I suppose I will say that so that was a 5-year contract when we first started in Norwich Park Tennis at Eaton Park. And one of the things I was thinking about recently was, a question that's been raised: why has it taken so long to get to the point where we're saying we need better data and these are the priorities going forward? And what happened is we were coming to the end of the first 5-year contract, we were looking at the expansion, and we were in a position where to deliver some new all-weather courts, we extended the contract for a year, and then we started that process. And you're probably all aware, over the years it's been an ongoing process and has drifted and drifted, and there's been challenges around it. And it was always, next year we'll extend this one. So it's always been an extension of the first contract, where we finally got to the point that we're in a position to put in place a new improved contract. And that's as a result of tight timescales and waiting on decisions from planning and funders that suddenly things didn't happen for one reason or another, that we've got to extend because we'll try and deliver it next year. So that original policy around providing financially sustainable quality facilities in the city at value for money sort of drifted on beyond 5 years, but we're at a point to change that now.
Thank you. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, for your answers on there. I don't know, this should come up in this group or next group or one before. But can you tell me how many extra hours we expect to be played on tennis courts a year with the new lighting system being put in? I mean, I used to play tennis all the while on Hartford Park, and there used to be 2 green courts and 2 hard courts down there, and they took the green ones out a long time ago when I was in my 20s, not before. And I always thought it's better to play on the grass because you don't hurt yourself when you fall over as much as you do on the hard courts. But I've seen that the hard courts down there are used for a while when I go past. So I was wondering, when we got lights on there, we got lights down on the Lta recreation ground, which are fantastic system working on there, and that's great. You should put it in an area of deprivation, and Ham Park coming on very soon, which will be really, really good for that area as well, and especially for the school just around the corner to use. So can you tell me how many extra hours we expect? Because is the contract the same money, or has it gone up because the extra hours, or gone down?
So the extra hours is difficult to. I may be guessing if I said it at the moment, but we know that demand at Eton has caused issues over time. It also restricts in terms of the coaching that can be delivered to give the community the use of the courts. So part of it, Norwich Parks Tennis in 2012 had zero membership. I think the last time I looked at about 806 households, and there are more than one individual playing from a household. And I think off the top of my head, the figure for the last year was around 20,000 court hours, starting from zero. I wouldn't expect in the next 5 years that we'll go to 40, that will double that. But there will be an increase, and that'll be partly led by the data from the LTA, because they have whole national data, and it's not only around who plays tennis, but it's based on surveys that they've done and work with the Office of National Statistics around the potential of people that want to play tennis and giving them an accessible route. So again, once we're in a position of awarding, one of my first things is a meeting with the LTA to have an initial discussion around a number of performance indicators to get some, data that's based on the national take-up, and then it'll be meeting with the successful tenderer to look at what we set as the targets going forward. Because one of the key, although previously the court hours has gone up a lot, success for me isn't a doubling to 44,000 if it's everyone on player coaching pathways. So hopefully that's answering your question, Councillor Driver.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Carlo is next, please, then Councillor Garrett.
Thanks, Chair. Should I ask Simon, how households on universal credit take part in Norwich Parks Tennis, given that the Norwich Notes no longer operates, please? And what are the incentives for an operator to encourage play by households on universal credit? And then secondly, I want to ask a question about the membership. It's actually quite low. I requested data on membership, and it's 810, the total number of memberships of Norwich Parks Tennis in 2021, which is actually quite low for the whole of the city, and about 20% of those households come from outside the city boundary. So when you were looking at Norwich Parks Tennis possibility for Hayham Park, did you look at an alternative use of the grass area for grass play by potentially a much larger number of people than would be played on by tennis players, for example? And just to make a point about Hayham Park and the alternatives submitted by the Hayham Park Grass Tennis Group. In fact, they were proposing free turn-up and play sessions on Sundays.
What I do just need to, thank you, Councillor Carlo, reiterate to the committee that we're specifically looking at the calling for the concessionary contract being awarded.
I agree.
And unfortunately, whether or not whatever the rights and wrongs of the argument are, whether or not Hayham Park should have continued to be used in a grass capacity, whether it be for tennis or not, is outside the scope of the calling today.
I think that's true, but I think Mr. Meek Simon did raise the point about the scheme submitted by the Grass Tennis Group, and so I thought that I would just put the record straight on that. And also, I think we should consider memberships in terms of value for money. And to my way of thinking, 810 memberships for Norwich is really very low for a huge amount of public money spent today, given that a significant percentage of that number come from outside the city boundary.
Thank you. I think the membership is a valid question, but not necessarily related to the grass or not grass aspect of that. So if I can leave that membership question in play, please.
So, 810, I thought it was 806, 810 households has come from no households getting to play tennis for £35 a year free. So that is, in my view, is a substantial number of people that are playing the tennis. With regards to the out of city use, it makes it financially sustainable, and if there are sufficient courts that it's not causing an issue for tennis provision for the residents, then there are other services across the parks that are used for people outside the city that are funded by the city. If it becomes an issue, or in terms of, and this is a consideration in terms of before I was asked about the pricing going forward, and how we could do that, there is an option that if somebody joins as a household from out the city, we could look at that being a more expensive membership, as we do with out-of-city residents for the allotments. So that is something that we can, consider and deal with. And I do agree that, the city resident providing a facility that is benefiting those outside the city, we could look to increase the cost of that. But it hasn't been created an issue at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, just to ask if you can answer the questions then about households on universal credit, how they will take part in Norwich Parks tennis, please, and what incentives are for the operator to encourage more people on universal credit to take part?
As I said, we haven't got the data at the moment. We can gather that data as part of the transfer, and then we can look at, with the operator, how, if there is somebody not from an area of deprivation but on universal credit, that a concession that would, that is considered as part of their pricing, they would put in place equivalent to the people that are in REITers.
So when you say concession, you mean that there will be some sort of charge?
No, we could look at arrangements. If there's a way of easily making it, we can easily validate it of some arrangement that they could get membership at a reduced charge. But I can't, at the moment, we've got to get an operator in place. We need to have those conversations, and I would, primarily it needs to be financially sustainable, but not in terms of an operator that is heavily lining their pocket with profit. So that would be part of the process that we would go through with the operator. And I would say that the LTA also, they are coming from parks. Tennis is the biggest sector that delivers for inclusive tennis out of all their tennis provision in the country, and they are coming with the same objectives as the council. So that will form part of the meetings with the successful provider to determine what options there are and how that fits in with a financially sustainable model.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Councillor Galvin in there. I think you had your hand up previously.
Thank you. I understand you said that the policy was drawn up around maintenance of the parks, really, of the grass courts. It became an issue. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a maintenance issue. That's why the tennis, that was the nub of the policies where it started, was because it was problematic to maintain grass courts. But I just wanted to be reassured, really, going forward, that you've got enough support because it is concerning that the data hasn't been held until now on the usage. And it's concerning, I think, that the sets aren't there yet. I understand that it's a new contract, but I would want to be assured that data will be collected from the word go, and that no other groups have been involved in drawing up this contract, as I understand. So I kind of want to point out here that user groups could be involved to make that data, and a bit more work could be done around what the indicators could be. And I'd like to see that in the public domain going forward. And if you think, I suppose my question then is to you, do you think you have the right support to make that happen as an officer? Because I know you have to, do you have the right political backing to really make sure that the money is spent on the people that need it? And is there more that can be done to help in that area?
I'd like to reassure you that it will be better going forward. Norwich Park Centre has been a learning process for me since 2012. It's never, the level of scrutiny on it I appreciate, and in terms of where it needs to go, linking in with the council's priorities, that's why I think the performance criteria for the previous contract was not very long. It was based a lot around just how many people are playing court, how is the income getting paid and things. And the learning, and I mentioned in the answer to the questions, that there's been a lot of learning. I don't, you know, a contract officer deals with it, but for me, I've put, you know, I've been the person that's been responsible for leading on this, and I want it to be, we've been successful. It's held up by the LTA as a model for the rest of the country. There are very few of these contracts that generate income. So there are a lot of positives with it, but we want to get better. And the areas that we want to get better in, as I've said, is I'm not driving the number of player pathways and coaching, because they'll do that anyway. But there's a whole breakdown of the performance indicators around the protected characteristics things, because I want that to be a focus. And it's a conversation that I've already had with the LTA prior to the new operator, you know, the new contract, that I need this, we want this to be robust and we want to start delivering better on these. And the LTA representative was, you know, behind it as well, because although they want the next great tennis star by the LTA, they also is a big driver on, you know, community tennis. And there's a lot of money, you know, park tennis has been identified as the vehicle for that. So I want to reassure you that I don't want to be sitting before you in a year's time or getting inquiries for data in a year's time and not being able to give you it. And my contract officer is aware of that also. So hopefully, you know, I'd just like to reassure you that it is important.
Thank you for that. Any further questions on this section? Councillor Farlow.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I'm not very convinced that there's a process around encouraging people from households on universal credit to come forward and play tennis. You want to have a discussion with a new provider. I just wondered if you can reassure me that, in fact, people on very low incomes will be encouraged to play tennis, that there is a procedure in place to encourage them to come forward, that the provider doesn't have disincentives for not encouraging people on universal credit to come forward. And I'm also concerned that there's sort of no lessons learned from the past about encouraging people from low-income households to play tennis. I recall Councillor Karen Davis saying in Cabinet that she was looking forward to provision of park tennis at Hayham Park because it would support her residents in town close and very low incomes to be able to play tennis, but I'm not sure that's the case. So can you maybe describe how people will be able to express an interest? Will they phone up the City Council and say that they'd like to play tennis but then they can't afford any sort of charge?
Chair, I've heard Councillor Carlo ask the same question 4 times.
That's why I'm asking it. That's why I'm asking it 4 times, because I haven't really had a response.
You feel part of the contract. Well, is there a different answer that is coming that relates to part of the contract? Yeah.
What we're looking at in terms of evaluating the tenders that we've had in, it's quite clear, and you can get a copy of this, we've undertaken that one of the questions you've asked is to look at the evaluation criteria for the contract. So one of the things that we will be scoring during the evaluation is how contractors are going to tackle inequality and also engage with local communities. Simon said earlier that we will be considering concessions for people in our households or individuals on universal credit. One of the other things we're looking at as well is the marketing of the service, and that's something that we will be looking at through the evaluation, whether that's through the website, through the council's website, social media, and also emphasising that we would welcome interest from people on universal credit or people who are suffering from deprivation. So that's something that we will be looking at. In terms of the lessons learned from the previous contract was quite clear there that we've acknowledged that we weren't collecting the data in the way that we would like. What we've also got to remember is that some of that data will not be how we would like it, given what we've been through over the last couple of years, and not as reliable as we would like. And that's affected both the amount of data that's come in and also how we've been, the capacity that we've had to evaluate it. But in drawing up the tender with the LTA, they've been really clear on what they're looking for in terms of these, Simon mentioned protected characteristics, and also inclusivity in terms of deprivation. So it's quite clear in the tender evaluation and the PIs that we be collecting that that's something that we're targeting. It's something that we had, Simon talked again about learning. It's a big list that we've learned that we aren't, or we haven't until now been able to demonstrate how well we're engaging with the private communities and how inclusive would be in offering. So that's the sort of reassurance that I can give you, and the undertaking that I can give you that we are looking at how inclusive we are, and that's a really big part of the evaluation process.
Thank you, Andy, for that answer. Okay, I'm now going to take us on to the last section. We've got section 3, which is specific deliverables, and there's 3 questions that have been posed on that, so I can hand over to whoever's going to answer those. Is that you again, Simon? Thank you.
Okay, specific deliverables, question 1A. What kind of services are expected to be provided at the pavilion at Hyde Park? The pavilion will be used within the tennis area for the service provider. 1B, as it is currently derelict, will undertake renovation to make it possible to provide services there. The council will be doing that via an insurance claim, so we've had the loss adjusters agreed that, and it's been out to tender, and the contract has been awarded to do the works. What are the improvements at Harford Park tennis courts, and when will they be delivered? How does this link to an increase in £35,900? So the works at Harford Park are new floodlighting, re-fencing, resurfacing and repainting. We're currently discussing the funding with the LTA. As I mentioned before, they're looking at expanding. They've received some money from the government, I think it's around 28 million for the improvements in Parks tennis. So it's been recognised its benefits, and we're currently working with the LTA on trying to secure the funding to do that. The courts will currently be charged at £900 per annum, which is what is currently being charged. We normally, when we start a new site, we start at a lower rate and it increases over the first 4 years, to allow them to establish a user base. The courts at Harford, I don't know if council drivers played on them recently, but they're not a great surface when you compare them to the new ones, and that's why it's remained at £900 per annum. A further £7,456 if office space at Eden Park is required. What provision does that refer to? That's the use of a room in the rotunda which the current operator is using. It is an option for the operator to operate from there or not, which is why it's an additional figure in the contract. It's up to them to decide whether they use it or not. If they don't, then we look to lease or generate some income from a different user. What is the minimum spec for consumables such as nets and balls, and what other items fall under, etc. here? We don't specify a minimum spec for the consumables. In terms of the provider that is trying to encourage people to play tennis, it's to play with a decent tennis ball and a decent racket. Because if that wasn't the case, people would not be wanting to come back. Their aim is to get as many people into tennis and then playing on a regular basis. under etc. is probably will be linked to the straps and things to do with the nets. It's basically anything within the court, and also the what users will be provided with to use.
Thank you very much for those answers. Any clarification questions there? Councillor Garvey.
Just a clarification around booking numbers, which is what I understand. It's the booking numbers don't actually always link to court usage, so people can book a court without playing on it, and a significant amount of times that does seem to happen. What steps will be taken to ensure that the available courts are actually used? People can become a member of Norwich Park Tennis, book a court and then not play, and that does happen from research quite a lot. There are figures that show that. So what steps will the council take to make sure that doesn't happen in the new contract?
I don't have data on what I call no-shows. So if you obviously have, so I'd be interested to see that, to look at the scale of the problem. It hasn't been raised as an issue by the current operator, but without really seeing the detail, it's difficult to comment on something that I haven't really seen the evidence of.
Certainly that information has been shared with members in a report, but it may not have found its way to you, but I suppose it would be important to build it into the contract in some way, because it does equate to actual tennis played, which is at the root of why all this is happening. So it would be good to see it built in, some mechanism for checking that court booked equals game played, or something approaching a game played.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Can I provide some informed information from the fact that I play tennis once or twice a week? And certainly, in my experience, if the group that I play tennis with, if for some reason a court is not used, colleagues from the Old Tennis Association who are doing the coaching are very hot on that, because there is a demand for courts, and if those courts are not used, then other people are denied the opportunity to use those courts. So there is, as it were, on the spot awareness of courts, because the courts I play on, some of the evening tennis, playing next door to coaches who are working with people who want to enhance their tennis skills. So I don't know, I sense an underlying narrative, Chair, of there are really fewer people playing tennis, therefore we didn't need to have high tennis courts upgraded. Now I'm just surmising that fact, but actually the reality is that I think it's true, isn't it, Simon, that the demand for tennis in Norwich is among the highest in the country in terms of the success of building that extra capacity in to meet that demand.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know where we sit exactly in a national league table, but the LTA are pleased with the uptake, and again it goes back to the data that drives their investment is the potential within the population that express an interest but don't get involved, and that's what, working with the LTA and then whoever the provider is, we're looking to increase.
Okay, I've got Councillor Driver and then Councillor Galvin. I'm just going to make a sort of personal point. Unlike Councillor Waters, I'm not a tennis player, but I am a runner. And one of the things I've noticed about park run is whenever you add a new park run in, the number of people that take part in park run increases overall. It's a sort of build it in, they will come. So I just find that quite interesting. The other thing, and maybe it's quite unfortunate that perhaps it's happened now while we're having this meeting, but thought I'd just have a quick look at the Norwich Park tennis website, which currently seems to be offline with a server error. So in terms of this contract, is the new provider responsible for the management of the website?
Yes, they are via, it's an Lta hosted website, so it's national, Club Spark. It links with the gate system, so that will be supported via the Lta. It isn't a Norwich Park tennis server that's down, or it's Lta hosted.
Okay, I've gone to norwichparkstennis.org.uk and it's a server error in root application, runtime error. So presumably anyone trying to do it at the moment will be unsuccessful. Council Driver.
Yeah, I haven't played tennis for quite a few years now, due to I'm unfit, I think. So that's one of the reasons. Tennis balls, I hope we don't have to change them every 6 games, because there'll be a lot of tennis balls laying about all over the place, what they do at Wimbledon games. So I just hope we don't get to that situation. Can we just ask, is there any difference between 2 people hard on the court and 4 people hard on the court, or 10 different kids hard on the court per arm? Is there any, can they do that? Can a group of people hard on the court, or do they all have to be playing at the same time?
It would be a membership for a household, and that person will put the keypad in. So if they're playing doubles or 4 people, it's just the one entry through the access gate.
Okay. So if you put your access code in, I could take my next door neighbour and the next door neighbour and the next door neighbour in there, could I?
Yeah, you could, yeah.
Okay.
Once the keypad opens the gate, and then you would go in and play tennis with whoever you walk through the gate with.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
I'm glad to hear you're a keen tennis player, Councillor Waters. I'm a keen ward councillor, and I'm representing really the views of a lot of residents that have come to me as I was elected to do. And yeah, they are concerned about Hyde Park, but their concern extends beyond that, because it's a substantial amount of money being spent, and they don't see the money being spent in other areas, that kind of money, over £250,000 there. So I think it's a relevant thing to bring up here. It's not a narrative, it's a genuine question, and trying to do our jobs properly, of making sure that public money is well spent. So I hope you take it in that spirit, and that's the spirit we bring it in, really. We're very happy to see the council provide for facilities, and I know it's in very difficult circumstances to do that, but from what we've seen today, there wasn't proper actual knowledge or understanding of what they would be used for, and we want to make sure that going forwards that we do record that data and make sure people do benefit from the courts. So sorry, that's not a question, but I think I am satisfied that is what will happen going forwards, and we're ready to support that and help where we can with it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Carter, and then Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did ask a question about Harford Park tennis courts and when they might be delivered, and the response was it depends on usage and also market conditions. And I wanted to ask about the level of usage or membership, what's going to measure when the courts will be delivered, because the membership for Waterloo Park is extremely low, 93 households, and Harford Park has got 24 households. And so I wondered what the benchmark really is for deciding whether to take forward Norwich Park's tennis in a particular set of courts. In terms of recommendation, I know we're not on that section yet, but I just want to add a suggestion, which reflects on Simon's earlier response to a question I made, and that is maybe having a differential membership for people living outside the city boundary. I think that would only be right. A higher membership fee, because then that would help to support people on very low incomes.
Thank you. On that, I just looked at the monitoring officer. Talking there about potential recommendation, I wonder if you can clarify, in terms of this being a call-in, are we in effect bound by the either accept that we support the decision taken by Cabinet and take no further action, or refer it back to Cabinet? Are there any other specific recommendations that we can make?
Apologies. I think the Constitution is to a degree a little bit silent on that matter I was reviewing earlier. I think ultimately, as we say here, the committee will need to decide whether or not it supports Cabinet's decision or wishes to refer it back to Cabinet. I'm sure in a matter like that, it's something that perhaps we can get an indication on the acceptability of, but as indicated earlier, this is a contract in which there is a degree of negotiation as part of the pricing structure based on business plans that were initially submitted, so it's something that, if it was recommended, could only be considered as part of that negotiation and what's permissible within the contract.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I sort of butted in there. Yeah, I think so. On that basis, I think we could consider that the potential recommendation for the effectively differentiated pricing. Yes, to be considered. Okay, thank you. Was there another question in there that we need an officer answer for?
Yes, it was about the level of usage, which might decide whether or not to take forward constructing all weather courts at Helford Park, given that the usage currently is very low, the membership's very low.
Sorry. It is relatively low compared to the other sites, and I would say again it comes back to the part of that is quality of the service. There are no lights there, but part of in terms of looking at expansion, this hasn't been done in isolation just with the officers, but has involved the LTA and their data and a wish to expand tennis provision and involve more people from that area, and that's why they're keen on the improvements at Harford, with potentially funding that work. If that didn't go forward on that basis, then it would be limited what we would be able to do at Harford in terms of the surface. So it'd probably just be down to repairs, and included as it currently is. But the drive from the LTA and the response I've had for them is that they're very keen to invest and increase that, the amount of users at that site, and that would then enable a new operator to drive more in terms of marketing and things in that area for a quality facility, whereas at the minute it isn't a quality facility.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Giles.
Thank you very much, Chair. I worked for 2 years as a tennis coach for a community tennis club in Ipswich in an area of deprivation on the estate that is, or at least was, the recipient of EU Social Fund funding. And I remember the courts I was coaching kids on being covered in craters and that, and I think it's absolutely fantastic that we're providing these all-weather, high quality facilities on an all-year-round basis to the residents of Norwich at an affordable rate. I think this is a fantastic initiative, and on that basis, under paragraph 72K, taking into account Councillor Carlo's recommendation, I'd propose that we move to a vote on recommendation A on the report to support the Cabinet decision, in which case it can then be implemented.
Before I seek a seconder, can I just clarify, you say taking into account the recommendation, does that mean that you are in agreement that that recommendation stands? Okay, can I have a seconder? There's a proposer. Councillor Maxwell's hammering up first. So there is a proposed and seconded proposal to go to a vote.
Sorry, Chair, can we just clarify? So we're voting on recommendation A.
Just scrolling back to where we've gone. So we're voting on recommendation A, which is to support the Cabinet decision. And if there's agreement on that, it then gets implemented. So all those in favour of supporting the Cabinet decision, please indicate. And all those against? Sorry? Okay, sorry, all those in favour, please indicate. All those against? Abstentions? Okay, that is carried. So thank you very much, everyone, for your input today. Sorry? No, so I'm in favour. I'm too busy dealing with everything else. So that's carried, and we will be, so yes, that will be implemented. I'd like to thank everyone for the very full answers today. I think that's been very helpful, and thank you to colleagues for the questions there, and to Councillor Carlo's recommendation stands, and so we will ask Cabinet to consider as part of future negotiations looking at differentiated pricing.